Last time we talked about how randomness produces patterns that look meaningful even when nothing is happening. A hospital midwife delivers 9 girls out of 10 babies and thinks something's wrong. But it is just what randomness does. Today I want to show you something that makes that problem even worse. A problem that reveals a deep flaw in human intuition about probability and sample size. And this problem is so famous in psychology that Tversky and Kahneman, 2 giants of cognitive psychology, built a whole research program around it. Here's the setup. Imagine a large city hospital. On a typical day, this hospital delivers about 45 babies. Sometimes more, sometimes fewer, but 45 is the average. Now imagine a smaller hospital in a nearby town. This one delivers about 15 babies per day on average. Both hospitals are run competently. Both have good obstetric care. Both are using the same methods. Now here is the question. In a given year, which hospital will have more days on which more than 60% of the babies born are boys? Take a moment with that. Which hospital will see more days where more than 60% of the births are boys? The large hospital or the small hospital? Most people, and we have data on this, think the answer is either that it depends on something we're not told, or that both hospitals will be about equal. But there is a right answer, and the right answer reveals something important. The answer is the small hospital. The small hospital will have more days on which more than 60% of births are boys. Why is this? Why is the small hospital more likely to see extreme proportions? The answer is simple. Small samples are more variable than large samples. That is the whole answer. But let me make it concrete. On a typical day, the large hospital delivers 45 babies. For more than 60% of those to be boys, we need more than 27 boys. So we need at least 28 boys out of 45 births. If the true probability of a boy is 0.5, if there's no bias, how often does a hospital that delivers 45 babies a day see 28 or more boys? Well, it is possible, but it's not very probable. I could calculate the exact number, but let me just tell you, it happens maybe 2 or 3 days a year in a hospital that size. It is a rare event. Now, consider the small hospital. It delivers 15 babies per day. For more than 60% of those to be boys, it needs more than 9 boys. So it needs at least 10 boys out of 15. If the true probability of a boy is 0.5, how often does that happen? It happens much more often. In fact, using the math of probability, it happens roughly 40 or 50 days per year. Much more frequent. Why? Because the small sample is more variable. When you have a small sample, the proportion of boys you observe bounces around more. Sometimes you get 6 boys out of 15, 40%. Sometimes you get 10 boys out of 15, 66%. The variation is extreme. When you have a large sample, the proportions are more stable. You get closer to 50% most of the time. The variation is damped down. This principle is called the law of small numbers. And it is called that somewhat ironically because the principle is often stated the wrong way. People often say, the law of small numbers means that small samples look like the population, as if small samples are actually representative. But that's backwards. The truth is the opposite. Small samples are not representative. They are wildly unrepresentative. They bounce around. What happened is that Kahneman and Tversky did the classic study on this in the 1970s, and they showed that people intuitively believe small samples are representative when actually they're not. People have a misconception that is called, confusingly, the law of small numbers. And it works like this. People treat small samples as if they were large samples. People believe that even small samples should cluster around the population value. So when they see a small sample that is unrepresentative, they treat that as surprising, when in fact it is exactly what you should expect. Let me make this concrete for you with an example from psychology research, because this has real consequences. Imagine a researcher is studying the effects of a new cognitive behavioral intervention for anxiety. She recruits 20 people with high anxiety, and she runs them through an 8-week program. She measures their anxiety before and after. She finds that the average anxiety score decreased by 20 points. That is a large effect. The effect looks real. She publishes the paper. Cognitive behavioral intervention produces large reductions in anxiety, the abstract says. The finding is striking. The number is clear, 20 points. Now imagine another researcher who does not know this first study exists, and they run an independent replication. Same intervention, same measurement, same criteria for recruiting people. But this time, he recruits 200 people, not 20. He runs the same 8-week program. He measures anxiety before and after. And he finds that the average anxiety score decreased by 5 points. 5 points. A small effect. Far from statistically significant. Now, which study tells us the truth about the intervention? Most people, when they encounter this, they say, well, the first one, because the effect is larger. But that intuition is backwards. The second study tells us far more. Why? Because it has a much larger sample, and therefore much less sampling variability. Here's the key insight. The probability of getting an extreme result is much higher when your sample is small. If the true effect of the intervention is something like 3 points, you might still see a 20-point effect in a sample of 20 people, just by chance. The sampling variability is enormous. You might also see the opposite, a 20-point decrease in the control condition. The range is wide. But in a sample of 200 people, the sampling variability is much smaller. Your observed effect will be close to the true effect. If the true effect is 3 points, you will get something in the range of 2 to 4 points, most likely. You will not get 20. This is not a coincidence. This is a mathematical consequence of how sampling works. Remember from the week 7 lectures when we talked about the standard error? The standard error is the standard deviation of the sampling distribution. And the formula is SE equals the standard deviation divided by the square root of n. So if n is 20, you divide by the square root of 20, which is about 4.47. If n is 200, you divide by the square root of 200, which is about 14.14. You get about 3 times smaller standard error with the larger sample. A smaller standard error means that the sampling distribution is narrower. The results cluster tighter around the true value. And that means extreme results are less likely. Think about what this means. If you run a study with 20 people, your estimate is noisy. It could easily be way off from the truth. If you run a study with 200 people, your estimate is stable. It will be close to the truth. So when you encounter a striking result in a small study, your first thought should not be, this is a powerful finding. Your first thought should be, this could easily be noise. This has had enormous consequences for psychology research. In the last decade, a wave of replication studies have tried to reproduce classic findings from the field, and many of them failed. Striking results from small studies, when tested again with larger samples or more rigorous methods, simply did not hold up. This was called the replication crisis, and many people blamed researchers for dishonesty or for poor methodology or for p-hacking, running many analyses until one came out significant. And some of those things certainly happened. But some of the replication failures have a simpler explanation. The original studies were just underpowered. They had small samples. Small samples produce extreme results as a matter of course. The results look like strong evidence of an effect, but a lot of that look came from sampling variability, not from a true effect. So the lesson from the replication crisis is this. When you see a striking result, ask yourself 3 questions. First, how large is the sample? If it is small, below, say, 50 people, be skeptical. The effect could be noise. Second, has this been replicated? If this is the only study showing this result, and it is a small study, that is a red flag. Third, how large is the reported effect? If it is huge, be especially skeptical of small samples. Huge effects in small samples are noisy. They bounce around, they may not be real. The practical consequence is this. A finding that you should be excited about is one where the effect is small to moderate, but observed in a large sample. A modest finding in 300 people is more trustworthy than a huge finding in 30 people. Now I know this goes against intuition. Our intuitions evolved in a world where we did not have data analysis, where we did not have statistics. Our intuitions tell us to believe striking results. But those intuitions are tuned for a different world. In the world of research, where we run many studies and sample from distributions, those intuitions lead us astray. Let me give you a quick check on this. A research team publishes a study showing that a new memory technique doubles recall performance in working memory. The study had 8 participants. An independent team tries to replicate it with 100 participants, and they find a small improvement in recall, maybe 10 to 15%. Both teams used the same technique and the same measurement. Which result gives you more confidence in the reality of the effect? The replication study with 100 participants. Not because a doubling effect is not real. Maybe it is. But because the doubling effect in 8 people is far more likely to be a noise-driven outlier than a true effect. 8 people is a very small sample. You expect huge variability. You expect some research teams to get extreme results just by chance. The replication study with 100 people is much more informative. If the effect is real, we would expect to see at least some improvement in a large sample. We see 10 to 15%. That is a real effect, smaller than what was originally claimed, but real. The original study was probably showing us noise plus a real small effect, and we mistook the noise for part of the signal. This entire week has been building toward the insight that we need a formal way to ask, could this result have happened by chance? And next week, we finally answer that formally. We introduce the p-value. We introduce hypothesis testing. We learn to formalize the question, in a world where nothing is happening, how surprising is what I actually observed? But the foundation is already here. You now understand that randomness produces patterns. You understand that small samples are noisy. You understand that sampling variability is inevitable. What you're about to learn next week is just the mathematics of saying precisely, how much would this result surprise me in the null world? Next week, we move from intuition to formalism. We take the ideas we have spent 2 weeks developing, randomness, sampling distributions, variability, and we turn them into a concrete tool, the hypothesis test and the p-value. We will learn how to answer the question, could this result have happened by chance, with precision? And we will learn what a p-value actually means, because there are many misconceptions, and we're going to clear them up. You'll be ready to read research papers with a critical eye. You will know what to trust and what to be skeptical of. And that is the goal of this course.